Hey everyone, we just spoke with Tim Doyle, CEO and co-founder at Eucalyptus. Tim's an old friend and one of the most interesting marketers I know. He always has interesting takes on brand versus performance, but doesn't frame it in such a way. I think in his mind, kind of everything is performance, and really what drives performance is the ability to tell great stories and then also measuring it well. And I think Tim, the way he articulates what actually goes behind each of those, I find to be very interesting.
Yeah, one of the key ideas that he shares in this podcast is about the speed at which you catch the cultural moment being key. He tells this story about when he was working on a political campaign and 24 hours before the election cycle caught a key moment, and he feels like was able to actually have a real impact in that election cycle. And so we are excited for you to listen to this episode and get some of his insights.
All right, Tim, you've been very vocal against VC podcasts. And so with that, I'm honored that you agreed to spend an hour with us. And I hope I don't regret this. We've met a little over 5 years ago when you were described as the single best marketer in Australia. And you've become a trusted friend and one of my favorite people to riff with on just all things marketing and the evolution of D2C e-commerce. You've since scaled Eucalyptus into a leading consumer health brand and are one of the few who's kind of made this house of brands concept really work. And so excited to spend some time on that with you today and just all things marketing. And so maybe as a primer for our US listeners who aren't as familiar, maybe give us the 30-second pitch on Eucalyptus and the initial thesis behind setting out to build that.
Yeah, sure. So I was at Koala, a kind of like a competitor to Casper in the golden days of the big Facebook arbitrage, and kind of took that and thought, well, these businesses can grow really quickly, but often there are inverse returns to scale with regards to CAC. And so maybe if I take what is the key skill that they have, which is slick websites and good marketing, and apply it across a portfolio, then there's a chance that I could escape that CAC pressure and have like a really strong house of brands in the style of any of the holding companies. And so I thought that was really smart. It turned out to be, I think, like as a thesis, quite dumb, because I think all of those brands, when you run a company like that, all of the brands was exposed to the same risk, which was that as marketing gets more difficult and CACs rise, you don't escape, you just get exposed to the same thing across your entire portfolio. So that's why I never became an investor or a capital allocator. But I think what Eucalyptus got right, and got luckily right, I think, was that we have an underlying piece of technology that differentiates us. So as we launch new brands, like there is no Shopify in digital health. And so you can rely on your platform providing you with a competitive advantage no matter what category you enter. And so that gave us, like, as that got better and better, it got easier and easier for us to win new categories. And so when obesity turned up as like the great new category of digital health, we were way ahead of the field in being ready to serve patients in that space. And so that meant that we caught the momentum the fastest and have caught it now across 5 markets, several 100,000 patients, several $100 million of revenue. And so it's been a really wild ride, but I would say like not on the original thesis so much, but on an evolving ability to capture kind of lightning when it happened based on a really good piece of technology underlying that.
And when was it, like, if you rewind back on the journey when the health business started to take off, you still had a portfolio of other brands you were managing at that point, like, was the allocation of attention and resources, was that decision obvious to you, or how did you make it at that moment? My
co-founder is an options trader by background. And so I was like very into the idea of maintaining the portfolio and essentially hedging, thinking that like my original thesis would play out. But he was like, hey, the main thing in options trading is when you are onto a winner, like you back it to its full extent. And so I think like we went from a multi-brand arbitrage essentially to a multi-market play. And I think this is something that US D2C brands do quite poorly, which is build a range of countries and then have them growing at different rates and being able to deploy into them at different speeds. And so the same capital allocation advantage we had across multiple brands, we then got across multiple markets. And that's been really central to how we've been able to scale.
I'm curious, have you read Only the Paranoid Survive by any chance? By Andy?
Yes, I have.
Okay. As you're saying this, of course, like I can't help but think about the analogy from like the lessons of Intel, where they sort of like, they see in their factories by virtue of like the factory demand and factory output, that like chips are taking off relative to memory, and then they shift the business accordingly. One of the things that Mike was sharing with me is like, people call you sort of like a founder's founder. When you think about the strategy you deployed for your business, how do you think about helping other founders understand that strategy for how they should run their businesses? So like if you're advising another founder on like, hey, here's how we thought about it, here's how we resource allocated inside of the company, here's how we then made the decisions, here's how we brought the team along, like this is like hard to do in practice. Like it sounds easy when you say it the way you said it, but there's like real work that happens.
Being a good support to founders is actually primarily about kind of like parking your ego and like realizing that you only get a couple of things right on the journey. So like I would say like, you know, across, it's so nice to be able to look back on a journey and be like, oh, I made all these wise decisions. But in reality, we made like 3 or 4 correct decisions over the entire life of the business. But they were so right that nothing else really mattered. And so like when I work with founders or spend time with founders, I'm like, hey, like what are the 3 or 4 things that you're going to like nail and really scale here? And then what are the things that like actually don't really matter? And I think like, I think about the context of like Silicon Valley is such a mimetic place where so many people, it's just everything is just replication of everyone else's things. And so like these strategies that work for one business don't work for others. And so like I come from a marketing background where I'm like, well, like my brand, the things that work for my brand are the only things that work for my brand. And so like, who am I to tell other companies what's going to work for them? So I try and really make sure that it's like, these are the 3 things that work for me. They probably won't work for you, but I'm here to help you find your things.
And when you think about help you find the things, like I think the meta strategy is still deployable, right? Like the meta strategy of, hey, make sure your experiment, like for you, it was market-based, right? And so like different things are going to be true for different particular businesses. How would you recommend someone think about architecting the organization in order to be able to run their quote unquote main strategy, but not miss when something is sort of starting to catch them?
I think the most important thing here that I talked about with people is like, when you're building a team, you're running like a kind of like a sports team where it's like you have a constraint on your total salary spend, because obviously you're limited, and you're trying to produce the best possible outcome. Where are you going to spend in order to produce the best outcome? And so like, where are your superstars? Where are your like 3&D role players? Like, where are you actually not going to invest at all? And I think like that piece is like the portfolio management piece that's so important to get right, is to be able to go, okay, like what is the shape of team here and what is the shape of skills that is going to allow us the best chance of making this work? And so, for example, like Eucalyptus is fundamentally a marketing plus a operational scale company. And so the 2 things we have to get right is we have to get great marketers. That comes relatively naturally to me because I can see them and I understand how they work. But then we have to get great generalists as well, because ultimately like the thing that makes this business work is landing in complicated markets and grinding through and getting scale. And so we had to be really good at pulling people out of Bain early and young and going like, hey, here is a set of tools that you need to get in order to make a market successful. And so they're the 2 things we know how to do. And like, we weren't a technology building organization for the first few years, and we weren't a brand organization so much. We were just like the 2 things we were, and we were super disciplined and we made it work.
Before we jump into the marketing topics, I want to spend another minute on this. So you reference some of the DNA of early hires. I actually want to talk about being located in Australia and both the benefits and I guess like cost that had to you in scaling a business. Like what insights did you have that were a function of being based in Australia that you might not have had otherwise? And how has that impacted how you built the business?
Yeah, this is exactly the right question of like where you have to be uniquely thinking about your own situation, because like there aren't a deep pool of the best software engineers in the world in Australia, but we actually export lifestyle and wellness extremely well. So like we're very good at marketing health. Actually, in our like cultural DNA, it's very easy to export that. Like we have an idyllic lifestyle that people aspire to, and so how do you monetize that and use that as an advantage? And so that was something that was like really important to us really early on, is getting that right. And then other things that you see is like, well, it's a small market, but you're going to have no venture funded competitors in your spaces. And so you can be a local bully and then use your gross margin from your local bullying to then go and compete in other local bullying markets. We never do the US, right? We don't operate in the US because you'll all play your like blood sports and we will figure out how to do Japan. And companies do a really poor job of figuring out Japan because the incentives aren't there. You know, it's like, well, I've got California to worry about. I don't need, I've got 25 million people in Australia, so I have to figure out Japan. I have to figure out Germany. Whereas when the going gets tough for an American company, and I advised a famous American D2C luggage brand for a while, and I was dismayed to see the Thanksgiving campaign in the snow launch in Australia in November. And I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of like cultural arrogance that allows us the opportunity to win. That was really, really important, and understanding the advantages that become from being in Australia becomes a really important thing.
Do you think this is changing? So like Australia's had some great notable outcomes recently, or kind of on their way to outcomes. And it feels like we are, at least as software investors, we are opening up our eyes to the greatness that can come out of Australia and the unique kind of attributes of Aussie founders. Like, do you think this is changing?
No, I don't think it's changing. I think like I definitely didn't want to say that Australia can't produce great software companies. It just has to produce its own type of software companies. Like it can't produce the type of software company where your pedigreed Series A Silicon Valley VC calls up everyone in their portfolio and forces you to be a customer. You know, it can't produce a like YC networked kind of customer acquisition strategy. But what it can produce is like real PLG discipline in the form of what we've seen from Canva or from Safety Culture or from Atlassian, or it can produce like really interesting brands, which hopefully is like what we've been able to do or what ASOP's been able to do. Like we don't need to become part of the Silicon Valley mega machine. We have to kind of continue to play to what our strengths are and produce great companies that way.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to move to a deeper set of marketing topics, and I think I'm going to start with a cliche framing that you and I have discussed a lot, and then let's go a lot deeper onto it. So, brand versus performance. We've spent hours kind of discussing this topic. You know, I've made the point, kind of everything's performance. It's just a question of time horizon. I know you have some nuanced thoughts on brand as well. Like, maybe talk about Eucalyptus. Like, what does the integration with these two disciplines look like today? And then let's maybe go deeper on a few attributes.
Yeah, like your framing of it is the most eloquent framing, so I'm not going to try and reframe that. But I think what I think is really important from when I just never say the word brand. Like we talk about narrative and we talk about measurement. And so the reality is the great, like if it is the golden age of narrative. Like there is more returns to good storytelling than there's ever been. If only the people who historically have defended brand advertising would shut up and actually learn to do measurement. Like the rewards for big ambitious storytelling are better than they've ever been. And like the grubby arbitrage era that I grew up in is largely gone. And so like my view is that like the challenge is how do you tell great stories, and the bigger the risk and the more ambitious that you are with them, you have to be better at measurement. I think the great pairing of modern marketing is hugely ambitious, high risk storytelling and great measurement. And so if you do those two things, then you're doing performance marketing at scale and you're doing storytelling. And there's no such thing as brand marketing. It's not a thing.
It sounds like, and I'm excited that you listened to the episode with Brian Cano from True Classic. He's a friend of mine who, I consider to be like a pretty good storyteller. Like he used to work at a company called Nude, and then he now works at True Classic. And in both places, he took like quite risky approaches to the kinds of stories that he chose to tell. And oftentimes you're seeing this like rhetoric around like the risk in the story that the brand is willing to take. Do you think that great storytelling has to come with that level of perceived risk? Or like, how does someone action on this idea of tell great stories? Like, I hear you, I believe you. What do I do?
Risking can take a number of forms, right? It can be brand risk in the sense of saying something interesting. And the greatest way to take risk in marketing is to say something interesting. It's the obvious, like, and best way to cut through. That is the obvious thing that is like the first opportunity there. But I also think like risk takes the form of the scale and uncertainty that you're willing to take the bet in. So you might be the first one to do a channel that's entirely unmeasurable. I was talking to this company yesterday and they just bought 1 million fortune cookies. And I'm like, that is going to be so hard to measure, but it's so perfect as a new acquisition strategy. And so I'm like, risk is both how you tell the story and then where you place the dollars and the scale that you place the dollars at. And so I think like good storytelling has tension in it, and so there's real returns to that. But there are many forms of risk. It's just how do you create a idea or a story that cuts through into new space and kind of breaks the pattern. And if you do that, then the attention is yours to do what you want with.
Yeah, Tim, no, that makes a ton of sense on sort of like how to think about the risks that you need to take. And then the second part that you were talking about was on the measurement front and like just like doing good measurement. Again, it's like a topic that's like easy to say and hard to do. When you think about what good measurement is, like there's a lot of debate right now, like attribution, incrementality, MMM, and there's again, as an observer, there seems to be more and more consensus that incrementality is the quote unquote best approach. How do you think about each of those three and what place they hold in the marketing stack?
Yeah, so like I think you're right that measurement is the main thing. I actually am like one of the world's biggest normies on this, in the sense that like I think the most important thing to get right is like to be directionally good at understanding what a certain piece of creative or campaign is trying to do and whether it does it. And so, like, okay, let's take the fortune cookie example, right? It's not going to be measurable. You're not going to see uplift in an incrementality test, but you need to do the hard work to go like, what is the signal that we will get here that indicates this is moving in the right direction? And I'm going to continue to take this bet based on that signal. So, like, you know, the silly version of that was like, put a QR code in the fortune cookie. But like, reality is the QR code conversion will be poor. And so, like, what is directional signal that we would believe in here? And then if we can get that, like, let's double down based on our ability to take a portfolio of bets as to what actually works. And I think, like, the other really big thing about, like, being a normie on measurement is, like, I don't find there to be a very good answer for, like, the challenge of modern performance marketing is produce thousands of ads. And so, like, when I see channel-based attribution of uplift or campaign-based attribution, I'm like, lol, we were having a good creative week or a bad creative week. Like, that is actually not going to be that accurate. And so, like, what matters to me here is having a wide series of tools that I can use in different situations to get signal. And then so I use all of these things, right? Like, I definitely use like YouTube's the one where holdouts and uplift studies are the best, because like they're the hardest. It's the hardest thing to measure and it has the biggest impact. But I'm also like really drill into our team that the thing that you have to be best at is understanding the thing you're trying to move and looking for lots of different signals to do it, and then having a wide array of signals to get things right. And also, I think like one of the things that people aren't doing enough of is like getting really good at understanding what's working in the channel. Like having a really good picture of what events are working in Facebook, what different creative styles are working, and actually doing most of your measurement within the platform, and then looking for like directional signal between channels. And then also people are premature optimizing with measurement. I think like we're seeing too many pieces of tooling, particularly from an MMM perspective, when like I think like the great struggle with MMM is it is directionally useful and people are using it as a precise tool, and it is not a precise tool, and it deals with creative really poorly. I think like the answer is use them all and use them as best you can, but start with a really good understanding of the thing that you're trying to do and the signal you're trying to capture, and then move down into greater complexity from there. And the fool's errand of producing the perfect attribution system is a real trap for growth teams, and I think like one that I see so many go after.
Yeah, and I'm not here to shield portfolio companies, but you did just articulate kind of the thesis behind Paramark, who I know you guys work with, which is a triangulation of all these different methods. I think there's, the truth does not lie in just one.
And they're smart on it, right? Like they're really smart on giving you an array of tools to play with and allowing you to kind of choose your own adventure, which I think is really important.
Yeah. So I want to spend more time on this creative piece. And like, you've talked about the alpha, that there is alpha just by doing creative well. And creative is not just asset generation. It's broader kind of campaign ideation and kind of like really end-to-end creative was what I'm referring to. I think in companies and in agencies, that's often a blend of process and creativity. And I think AI plays a role in both. Who do you think, well, so there's a couple of questions here. One is like, who do you look to is doing a great job, maybe besides Eucalyptus? And then process and creativity, are these two synergistic or are they at odds?
The first one is easy. I think we see a couple of the modern D2C. So the brand that inspires me most from a creative perspective is Mischief. Like the fact that they can do product launches on repeat at scale, hit them, make sure they work, and then capture cultural moments at the speed that they do with the accuracy they do. Phenomenal. Like truly the best modern marketing engine that I can see and understand. And I just like am so impressed every time. So that to me is like the most inspirational thing. And I think an example of where like you have performance style principles in terms of moving at speed, capturing moments, kind of scaling through virality, but real discipline in the process side to make sure that product launches actually work. Into the second question, yes, we have two ways to create alpha, right? We can be the best at producing turning winning insights into winning ads, and that can be a repeatable thing. And I think you have to get good at that, and the skill set that is good at that is very different to creating an environment where people who have big and broad range of ideas can bring those ideas to life. And so you have this constant tension between like what I would call like creative strategy and creative process. And I think managing that tension, and the most frustrating thing about managing that tension is you don't hold on to the equilibrium for very long. Like you either get overly processed and suddenly there's a million Notion docs floating around, or you lose all process and suddenly your ads are about something completely random. And so there's a constant tension that needs to be held between elite process and the freedom to be creative for your creatives. And so I consider it like one of my primary responsibilities is to watch over and ensure that there is enough insanity, and then that the kind of system that allocates capital and time is as ruthless and effective as possible.
Yeah, and maybe one of the components of that system nowadays, of course, is AI. And you've kind of teed up this topic of like marketers obsessing over variance, like with a T, at the expense of kind of variance, kind of like bold swings. And I think if you think about the role of AI, like it could both play a role in helping you, swing bigger, really stretch you on kind of like, out of box ideas, or, and maybe more likely, it could just get you down kind of a rabbit hole of more micro optimizations, generating thousands of variants to kind of the same concept. And you've kind of like, you're more likely to hit a local maximum that way. Like how are you thinking about AI in this context?
So something Zuck's been saying a lot, like our dear beloved overlord has been saying a lot recently, is that eventually Facebook will handle all of the creative for you, and you'll just give it your gross margin and pray. And I think that's the really scary endpoint of a lack of understanding of what marketing is actually about. I think like we've been on this perpetual march, which AI has really accelerated, which I would call like the face to camera, hold up the photo, hold up the product UGC era, right? Where it's like you're just getting more and more precise with exactly the small modification to the ad that makes it work slightly better. And like, so I think like that being an inevitable endpoint where AI just does the whole thing, obvious. And that's where Zuck thinks that advertising will go. And I think probably half of advertising goes there, because like half of advertising is that like soul crushing UGC. But I think and I think the True Classic guy said this in a really fascinating and interesting way, is great modern advertising is the ability to move at the speed of culture and inject yourself into that speed of culture. And I think like the ability to use AI to move faster, his Bigfoot example was bizarre but brilliant. I think like the Sydney Sweeney example is as interesting to me, which is like things happen in real time, and then if you can respond and produce creative in that, you blend the line between news and advertising and culture and advertising, and that's when advertising is most effective right now in the digital world. And so the anecdote that I like always come back to is I worked on a political campaign as my first big digital advertising job in 2016, and we spent $30-40 million on advertising in the campaign, and the ad that worked best was on the morning before the election, the opposition leader said, I can't guarantee no cuts to healthcare spending. And we cut that straight away, turned it into an ad, and 5 million Australians saw it in the 24 hours before the election, and it became a huge election issue. And so to me, like the ability of AI to increase the speed at which you can move and then the breadth and then lower the cost of taking ambitious swings, that to me is where the alpha will remain. And hopefully Zuck's terrifying view of the future doesn't play out in the because that remains really important.
And I want to ask a quick follow up here. You're talking about speed, like it ties back to the process question. So really, this is about speed, and like establishing a culture of speed. Maybe it sounds trivial, but like how do you ensure that trickles across every part of the org? Like how have you institutionalized this?
So the big thing you need to achieve when you're trying to get creatives to move fast is you need to change the reward cycle from craft to the dopamine of performance and outcomes. So it's really, really hard to do. But like our creative team runs on even though we're not a baseball country in Australia, we run on a single, double, triple home run per month system. And so they get incentivized and rewarded on the number of runs they produce in the month. The reason we have the single, double, triple home run system is because there are many ways to produce a run in like the Moneyball kind of sense. You could be great at producing singles and 4 out of 5 shots you take is a single, or you could be a home run person. And ultimately, like it's better to be a home run person, but it's harder to be a home run person. And so changing the incentives to really care about getting the dopamine out of performance rather than craft is really, really hard and really, really important. And then once you've got that, then it's about reducing the risk, reducing the cost of failure. Not the risk, increasing the tolerance to risk by reducing the cost of failure. So like any company that talks about brand guidelines in the year 2025 is in trouble, in my view. Insert yourself into the moment. If it doesn't work, we turn it off. Who cares? And that's like very ingrained in the company here at Eucalyptus.
Okay, I'm going to make a quick comment that I think you will find interesting, and then I'm curious about something. There's a company that I met, and I'm not obviously going to reveal who it is, 4 years ago, where the person was describing such strictness on their brand guidelines that they were unwilling to do other things as a consequence of that. And I remember telling them, like, hey, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to work with you because of this. And I think that they were like surprised to hear that like a vendor is unwilling to continue the conversation upon hearing that. But I actually think that like way of thinking about brand is, you're totally right, is just not correct. And in fact, like perhaps what you're saying is, instead of guidelines, it is more like, hey, how do we show up when something in the culture changes? So like now going to the question, like how do we show up when something in the culture changes in order to like capture that zeitgeist? I guess Mike asked a really awesome question around the risk tolerance in the organization. What is it that you do to incentivize people to like keep on top of the culture in a way in which is sort of like, I would call it as like brand additive, as opposed to brand guidelines, right? Like what are the things that you do to like keep people, quote unquote, in the zeitgeist to be thinking in that way? Because again, easier said than done, right? There's a reason why certain companies are so great at it and other companies are not.
Yeah, I wish I was better at this, to be honest. Like I think this is not something that I would consider myself like an elite like kind of proponent of, because companies do it better than we do it, and I think we've been a little bit timid at times in our ability to get it exactly right. I think like where my head is at with it currently is the challenge is how do you be really clear about the types of things that you're willing to involve yourself in and engage in. And I think like that's really easy to say, take in a positive some way, but I actually think great brands are the ones that are able to have the discipline to choose their moments in a disciplined and kind of selective manner. And then what are the things that we're not willing to do? And what are the things that we're willing to move against the tide on? And like, I think those are what makes great modern brands, is the ability to like know, not just to ride a trend, but to go, this is the thing that we insert ourselves in, and this is the way we do it, and these are the values, or whatever the term that you want to come up with there, that allows us to do that, or places us in those scenarios. And I think I wouldn't say, I would love to get better at that. I think I'm doing a rebrand for one of our brands with the Pattern Brands team at the moment, or they're called Little Planes now. And I think like one of the things I'm really trying to work out is like, what does it mean for us to turn up in the weight loss conversation in different ways? And I don't have great answers, but it really is something that's important. So I think I would urge people to think about it, even if I can't direct you as to what the exact answer is.
Do you think the challenge comes from, hey, we just have like not had this type of marketing before, or it's just too hard to keep up with? And not to like always pull the conversation back to like AI and AI tools, but like, is there just an instrumentation issue that leads to the difficulty in being able to be good at this, right? Not saying that this is possible, but like, why not just understand like, hey, every day, just get like a report of like, hey, here's what people are talking about.
Yeah. This was the great promise of social listening. Like I remember when everyone tried to sell you social listening tools as a thing, and it's actually not knowing what people are talking about. It's deducing where that story is going to go, and where the how to involve yourself and inject. It's not like there's a great documentary on Netflix about Jerry Springer, and the guy, the producer, is the guy that is like this awful human, but understands exactly how to press the buttons of the audience. And I think like, to me, that's actually the skill. And so an example is something that I'm constantly struggling with is people's attitudes towards weight loss medication in Australia are largely they consider them cheating, because they say fitness is a virtue and health is a virtue, and it has to be earned. And so like there are constantly moments where someone says something ridiculous and belligerent about obesity. And so how do we choose where and how to show up? Not picking the moment to show up, that's not very hard, but like figuring out the shape in which you turn up there is a really big challenge. And this is why it's the golden age of narrative, because like the great, like, you know, like Dan Wyden or like the great advertisers of all time, they're flying right now, because it's like you have so many opportunities to tell interesting stories, but we have to get over the like myopic performance marketing is evil view to actually land there.
Actually, it's worth spending a few minutes here on like consumer health. You know, we are in this golden age of so much is happening in healthcare right now. I think there's much higher tolerance for experimentation. Self-directed health is a important meta. And I also think the role of AI in healthcare is interesting in various ways as well, as all of our kind of biomarkers and everything are kind of being fed to the models, and we now have different levels of control over our own health. Maybe one question for you is, so when you're in a moment like this and you're clearly like riding a wave, or in part helping create that wave, but that wave is getting noisier with a lot of other players, like how do you think about trying to do different stuff and stand out versus just riding and acknowledging that, you know, that's going to carry you pretty well? Yeah,
you move fast to ride. And then you get well set on the wave, and then you kind of plan your strategy for the rest of the wave. One thing I'm always thinking about is like, by being chronically online, I tend to be really early to things. And so like, I often think I'm late and then I'm actually really early. And so like having the discipline to realize that you're early and then just do the thing. Don't be overly ambitious. Don't be over creative. Just do like people always give me shit about Eucalyptus being like, it's like a D2C business. It's like, right. It's like a commodity product, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, man, well, you build a $500 million business, you know, because the thing that I now have the opportunity to do is like figure out the next phase. And so now that like the thing about like everyone in Silicon Valley has too much SaaS brain, where like you build the thing and it's the perfect shape and you're able to scale it and it's like the greatest thing ever. Whereas like in healthcare, it's really, really hard to get to scale. So if you get an opportunity that is an ugly shape to get to $500 million of scale, take it and then figure out what to do with those patients. And so like now I'm very much in the world of like, well, I've got the capital, I've got the time, I can figure out product expansion, I can figure out where longevity is going, what longevity actually means in the context of the median patient. But for a long time, I was like, where is next gross margin dollar? And I think like they're like certain categories require that discipline. Like I often talk to people in our team about being truffle hounds for gross margin, because like if you don't, you die waiting for healthcare to change, and it doesn't really happen in the way that you'd hope.
Yeah, and maybe sticking on this healthcare topic. So I guess the power users of a year ago are now kind of the normies today, right? Like this is all happening very quickly. People who were experimenting with the Huberman protocols or following Mark Hyman are now the mainstream. And so how do you think about balancing between kind of the power users and kind of the normies? And is that a delineation that you even like use internally?
Yeah, definitely. I care about the normies. I think what our challenge is, and what we do really well, is we remove the friction to action. That's what our commerce layer actually does. Like if you think about kind of extending the shop, like we're an e-commerce business fundamentally. And so you can be an insights business in health, or you can be a actions business, and we're an actions business. And so we exist to make it really easy for the median consumer to make the next good decision and do the next right thing for their health. And so it's very rare that I'm going to be like, here's the sauna and ice bath protocol that you need to be in. It's like, how do you make sure that when you're hungover, you don't compound one bad day with another bad day? And so like I think about our responsibility and our opportunities to serve the median consumer. And then as trends happen, I will make decisions about whether or not we adopt them into our median consumer platform. And that's because that's the wedge that we have. You know, we have the median 45-year-old woman. And so I could be more grand with my view, but the reality is I serve the patients that I serve.
Yeah. So maybe jumping back to some of the marketing and creative topics. So agencies, you and I have discussed kind of offline, like the role of agencies and kind of what they're becoming and what the opportunities are. I actually think there could be a contrarian play here where actually the opportunity to create an agentic agency with like high gross margins that really just deeply specializes in the creative process. It could be a good time for that. There's probably a variety of reasons why that's a bad idea. But like, how do you think about this? Like if you were not building Eucalyptus and you were exploring kind of concepts of the agency world, what would you be thinking about? And then maybe within Euc, as you scale, like what is the role of agencies?
Yeah, it's like, as you can tell and know from me, that I like hate a contrarian take. And so it's not one that I'm going to easily engage with, but I'll try. it feels like to me the golden age of agencies was very much when they were quite specialized. And so the like holding group do everything agency is a bad idea and has proven historically to be a bad idea. And so like what I increasingly think is like I think of my job as like a CMO, which I'll never escape, is like I consider myself job to curate a set of tactics to serve a strategy to grow my company. And so the more tools I have in my set of tactics that are available to me, the better I can allocate between those tactics. And if agencies can be hyper specialized and world class at providing one of those tools, I'll buy that every time. And so I think like the age of the small hyper specialized agency that does, organic YouTube content extremely well. It records podcasts extremely well. It makes extremely ambitious TV ads. And unfortunately, we've got enough of those agencies. Please don't start another one of those. But you know what I mean? Like the hyper specialized agency is back. I'm super, super anti-media agencies. I just think like, I just don't, it doesn't make it just like it's such a core competency for how I've always thought about building businesses that I just don't see how you could have a search agency like that would there's no greater negative signal in a company for me.
It's interesting. I'm trying to square how you're describing like the hyper specialized agency and sort of like serving the median marketer with this tweet, if you don't mind if I read, that you put out a few days ago. The best way to launch a MarTech biz is to aim at the dumb and lazy median marketer. Problem is people eventually churn when they realize the product doesn't deliver value. Much harder to build something top 10% of growth people want to use and then scale. I'm not sure I have a great way to describe the difference between like a MarTech tool and an agency. Like ultimately, these are things that a marketer buys to accomplish something, right? Like you can say that in like the agency's case, you're signing up for an outcome, and in the SaaS case, you're signing up for a tool. But with AI, like most people are describing SaaS as selling outcomes, right? And so that line is getting thinner and thinner. How would you describe what is the right way to think about building a business, building a MarTech company, for example, or an agency, given this view?
Oh, so I think like the difference between what I said in the tweet and what I would advise to building agencies is agencies don't need to have the aspiration to be massive companies. They don't need to build deeper into organizations. And so you can limit your ambition. You can do one thing, serve a normie, serve a great marketer, do whatever, because you don't have to continue to scale. But if you're going to be a marketing, and churn doesn't matter. Like patient churns, get a new patient. Yeah, customer churns, get a new customer in the agency world. It's like less important. Whereas if you're going to build a great SaaS business, you have to be able to like deeply embed yourself and continue to deliver value and kind of scale, endlessly with increasingly complicated clients. And so I think the best way to do that, like it's really easy to build something that like it looks shiny to a modern marketer, right? Like whether it is a large animal based attribution platform, or it's a brand tracking tool, or whatever it is, it's really easy to make something that gives somebody an apparently useful answer for the median market. But like as you get more complicated, it stops being useful, right? And so people will get bigger budgets, they'll get better, and then they'll churn. Whereas if you're going to build something that's like really complicated but serves a really difficult use case, which I think both House and Paramark are trying to do in the measurement space, then you have a much bigger challenge. And so, but it's really hard to sell because the media market is going to go, this is too complicated for me to use. I don't want to do it. And so that, there's so many examples of this. Like there's Criteo, there's that Finnish business that was a layer on top of Facebook ads. Like it's really easy to build something that is like a veneer that works for a short amount of time. It's really, really hard to build something that actually makes a difference to marketing teams long term. Yeah.
All right. So we should stay on this because this is the category that comes to mind here is like the multitude of AEO tools that are out right now. So, SEO for kind of answer engines. And, on the one hand, you can make the case, hey, these are like very simplistic kind of monitoring products that have a nice UI that are delivering insights that will eventually become commoditized. And that is many people's view, or many of the top 10% marketers' view. On the other hand, you could say, hey, this is actually a pretty great wedge to get into these companies. And then over time, you layer on either services or other products that could actually help you influence results. One's ability to do that is still very much a question, but which of these camps, to the extent you've looked at this category, like which of these camps do you think, or where do you land on that topic?
This is a great software story, right? It's like, does the wedge turn into something valuable or not? This is like, Mike, this is a question for you in reality, because this is the venture question, right? It's like, do these things turn into something useful? I'll sign up for all of them, YOLO, like who cares? They don't cost very much money. I'll have a crack, and then if they turn into something good, I'll do it. And but like, that's actually not for me to have to worry about right now. Like my job as a customer there is to stay open-minded and then buy the value while it's there, and I'll buy the insight when it's there, and then if they turn into something great, awesome. If they don't, I'll churn in 1 second. That's the story of my engagement in most marketing tech tools.
Okay, and by the way, I think that's exactly the right behavior for a user. One of the weird things that I've noticed with AI tools is the rate at which they improve is like nothing I've ever seen. So like when I was buying software, I mean, we still buy software for everything. It's like you don't need to revisit something for like 3 years. Now you kind of need to revisit things every 6 months. But as a marketer, you're inundated with like an endless list of like animal-based software, I guess, right? And so it's like how do you think about the revisit cycle, right? So let's just say AEO, right? Like let's just use the same toy example because it's a good one. Like let's just pretend it doesn't work for whatever reason. When do you revisit it?
I look at the channel, I think mostly. I'm like, is the channel maturing? Like, do I have a problem to solve at the channel level, and then do I need tooling to solve this problem? Because the channel will get better. Like a classic example here is like the history of Facebook ads buying, when there was like Tenshu and Smartly and all of these absurd tools that were like helped you do things a little bit better. And then the channels got better, and I didn't have a problem to solve there anymore, so I didn't have a revisit cycle on the tool. So the question will be is like, how does the Google Search Console for AI end up working? Who does that? How's it going to work? Do I need help managing that? And then that will drive my revisit cycle, I think. But hard to know yet. Have to figure it out as we go.
Yeah, that makes a bunch of sense. And then the second question that I have is you versus your team. So another thing that I notice is like CEOs are like surprisingly good at meddling with AI tools, and it's just not as obvious that the rest of the team has like as much meddling desire. And so when you think about like, hey, here's the thing that I am finding has value for us. Person X on the team, can you like investigate further and figure out how we best use it, things like that? How do you think about that? Because we're seeing this very weird thing where even for us, as we sell to companies, it's actually easier to sell to this is like unusual in software buying. It's easier to sell to the C-suite than it is to sell to the user. And yeah, so I'm curious how you think about that for operating your own business.
I wish I was better at this. I think the reason that the thing that stands out to me is about the CEOs being more curious here is that it feels more existential. And so it feels like the right way to spend time because you're actually genuinely scared. And I think, or excited, but scared. I'm certainly paranoid. And so I think that feeling is what drives the experimentation, whereas that feeling in the middle of the organization is often met with like defense and kind of also I think a little bit of blindness to what's coming. And so creating a set of incentives. I think less important than the incentives here is actually hey, this is the right tool for now, and this is the one you should go deep on. So actually being a little bit of a curator here and being able to be like, hey, this is actually like, I spent a lot of the first time, after ChatGPT came out, being like, we all need to get better at AI. Like, why aren't we doing this? I'm going to I didn't do the dumb CEO memo where AI first now that everyone seems to do is like a LinkedIn marketing tactic primarily. But I did like at least be like, hey, like how are we getting better here? And I just didn't see the rate of progress that I would have hoped for. But then I think what changed is I was like, let's actually think about which specific use cases we care about right now. And let's try and go and bed them in rather than being like, here's a wide array of things that you might want to try. Like that feels like it is less sticky. But I wouldn't say like I've done a fantastic job here. Like we're not on the front of this where I'm like very, very slow.
So Tim, we're running close to time. I want to ask one last question that zooms out a bit. And as I'm reflecting on this conversation, just our conversations over the years, I think you strike this really unique balance of just having a deep appreciation and kind of grounding in just classic marketing kind of like foundations. Yet you're also like not afraid to try anything and just blow up any assumption and you're risk seeking. That balance is hard to find. And so like with that in mind, if you zoom out 5 years, how does your marketing kind of operation look different? Or does it actually look more the same than different? Like, what do you envision Eucalyptus's marketing machine looking like in 5 years?
I think we're in a really great spot. I think it's like there is great returns for doing compelling storytelling at scale in ways like Mike, the era that me and you grew up in is like, it was so boring. Is it exact match, or is it broad match, or is it this or that, or is it like, it turns out that most companies don't know how to do retargeting. There's an incremental $10 million. Great. Terrible time. Great. It rewarded the worst type of marketer, which was like completely uncreative, grind set, arbitrage. And so now I think like what's the rewards is like really, really working hard on the creative side and rewarding that, and then working really hard to measure behind how that works so that you can allocate capital in a really interesting set of ways. And I think like the new channel arbitrage is more interesting than it's ever been, because you're like, how do fortune cookies work, or how do skywriters work, or like, I hate the billboards in San Francisco thing. Like that's the work. Like the reason that worked for some people is because it was an arbitrage at the time. It's now not a thing. It's not. So sorry, that was a segue. But I think like basically finding new channels, doing interesting storytelling in those new channels, and then being really analytical behind that is like such a clear set of priorities that a team has to be able to do. And you just evolve and evolve and evolve and get better and get better. And then like maybe there's there's 100 new channels we don't know about yet. There's the content will get faster and different. And so I'm like so excited. I think it's like it's a great time to be a well-rounded marketer. And so I look forward to doing that. And then we talked about potentially going through a channel that I want to see not exist. I want to see LinkedIn go away, please. That's my LinkedIn content. Organic posting is that's my number one. My God, that feed is hell. So that's how I wanted to close out.
Tim, it's always a blast chatting with you. Thank you. This was great.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Great.